Tell us a little bit about Reverend Lawson.
He's definitely a gentle giant. He was a civil rights leader, pastor, professor, friend, grandfather. He was everyone's grandfather. He was just a cool dude. He was chill, and he was a giver, you know, a selfless person. He was not selfish at all, and he always looked out for other people. And so from what I know and just watching him, you know, I'm a better person. So obviously he was a leader, you know, a person who was innovative, creative, right? And so it's so much to talk about when you think about Pastor Lawson. But again, I think number one, outside of just being a pastor and, you know, a leader, he was a giver and a selfless person, for sure. You know, he was Houston's pastor. I remember going to the nail shop literally down the street, and someone asked, I had my Wheeler shirt on. He said, "Oh, you work at Wheeler?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Oh, that's Bill Lawson. That's his church." I'm like, you know, these are not black people. Right. So for them to know him, he's just, again, a gentle giant, a person who was just amazing. And again, he was a giver, thinking about how he's always looking out for the next generation. As I stated, that was who he was, right? He was not a selfish person. He was a forward-thinking brother. And the fact that, man, you know, people can stop him and say, "Oh, that's Pastor Lawson." And again, not just black people, but, you know, just many people, right? That's amazing. That's a lot. He was definitely a giant in this community.
We know that the Wheeler Avenue Baptist Church is in the historic 3rd Ward area of Houston. Tell us a little bit about why he decided to plant this church right here in the 3rd Ward community, right in between TSU, and then now we have U of H over here. Why did he choose this area?
So he was called to be the director of the Student Baptist Union at TSU. And so that was his role. He was a professor, right? But if you listen to Pastor Lawson, he was amazing with his words. Right, and so, you know, many people would talk about how he was simple but yet profound, and so he played a major role, and he impacted the students. And so the reason why he planted this church is because that impact that he had. And so students are like, hey, you know, let's just start a church, right? And I'm sure, you know, you think about starting a church, that was probably not on his radar, right? Hey, I'm here to be your professor. And I'm sure it was just a major thing to do. But the fact that you had young people saying, hey, let's start this church, and hey, you know, we want to listen to you more, and we trust the words that you are saying about God. And as far as TSU, he lived close to campus. And I want to say it was like a track that separated the school and his home. And so he started in his living room, and then to think about starting in his living room, and then now, if you just look around the building, it's like, I don't know, it's amazing for me because, you know, to see him be able to come back and see the fruits of his labor. You know what I'm saying? It's like, wow, I started in my living room, and to see what God has done. Not me, but God used me, and with 13 people, and now I think we had, you know, thousands of people, right? That's because a man said yes to a few students who said, hey, let's get this started. And so I'm just grateful that he was obedient, for sure.
When Reverend Lawson would come into church, would they notice him? Would they be able to recognize him? Do the young people kind of understand how monumental he was in this church?
They do. And it's because Pastor Cosby, he made sure that we knew who the founding pastor was. He made sure to, hey, our founding pastor is here, let's honor him. And the fact that the senior pastor, the fact that he did that, you know, young people, like, oh, okay, like, that's the founding pastor. So some of my youth, they don't know him, but they only know him through Pastor Cosby or some of the saints who grew up with Pastor Lawson, or the older saints. I think that's amazing. Like, that's, for me, that's legacy. And so again, we have new youth, right? It's a different generation, but we try our best to honor those before us, and that's important. So that's how they know about him. And of course, you know, like parents and, you know, again, being in the community, like, you have to know about Pastor Lawson at Wheeler Avenue and in Houston, Texas, for sure. Yeah. For sure.
See, how do you see his legacy still continuing on even after his recent passing?
Everywhere. I mean, I think about the youth space, right? Most churches, you know, aren't able, I would say, to have a youth space. You know, usually it's a classroom or, hey, stick him in a fellowship hall. But the fact that we have a youth space, you know, that lets me know that even Pastor Lawson, again, he was a forward-thinking man. He always looked out for the next generation, and he instilled that even in Pastor Cosby. And so now we have this youth space to freely worship God, to grow, to fellowship, and to love God, you know, like Pastor Lawson did. And as far as me being a youth pastor, my goal is not to change things, it's to keep it going. Right? Of course, we're in the new generation. We do things a bit differently, but it's to keep it going. And so I try my best to honor Pastor Lawson. I try my best to honor Pastor Cosby, to understand that I'm standing on some shoulders, right? You know, thinking about the sanctuary, right? 1985, right? You know, when Pastor Lawson built the building, he put screens in the building. That's what I mean, right? Innovative, forward thinking. Not knowing a pandemic would hit in 2020, you put screens in the church. And, you know, some churches, they can't afford screens. But to think about the next generation, that's my point. So I think walking into the sanctuary is like, wow, you know, he built this and he thought about us, right? And 1985, I wasn't even born in 1985. But I feel like he thought about me. You know, he thought about my youth. He thought about the people to come. And so, there's just a few, you know, areas that I would say just keeps the legacy going for sure, for sure. I don't know if you heard the story, but like, you know, with him being a civil rights leader, you know, in Houston, fighting for students, like bailing people out of jail, like it's like, man, you know, he started Wheeler at 33.
Crazy.
I'm 31. Even Dr. King was like, yo, come to Atlanta, work with me. He like, nah, I started a church. Yeah, because I think in this generation, I want to put our generation down, but sometimes we chase the clout.
For sure.
The applause, we like the likes on social media.
For sure.
But for Pastor Lawson, I feel like he was that guy because he looked out for other people. He didn't chase clout. He stayed in his lane and he stayed in his community.
Yeah.
And man, like God blessed him to see 95 years, almost 96.
Man.
And I really believe, I'm not God, but because he wasn't selfish.
Right.
I can keep somebody here who's going to look out for the next generation.
Yeah.
And that kind of makes me lock in and say, okay, bro, you know, what are you doing? How can you help the community where you are? Yeah. You may see your friends elevating, but it's like, dude, stay in your lane.
I mean, I remember being out there for the George Floyd protest, just not even for work, just out there with me and my friends standing up for a cause. I see them hand a microphone to somebody. I said, is this Reverend Lawson in this Houston heat, the middle of the summertime, but he's showing his presence within the community that, hey, this is a cause that I'm here for. And he did it with so much grace and just so eloquent with it. He wasn't aggressive, like you said, a gentle giant for sure. And you can see it even in his daughters. I didn't really have the chance to see him too much. I would see him in passing, but his daughter just exudes his same characteristics. It's just a beautiful thing. The way that they talk about their mother, his late wife, and just the love that they even had. He had about 6 full-time jobs, a full-time father, a full-time husband. I mean, and this is back in the day when this was not this easy in Houston, Texas to start this. It's just amazing to think about. And you're saying he started it right in his living room.
And that's what I'm saying, like to look around, I'm grateful because I don't have to start in my living room because Pastor Lawson said yes. And so the fact that he was able to do all of the work, I'm like, dude, I don't need to complain. A husband, father, pastor. So everyone is like kind of pulling on you. And that's why I just believe, you know, we are better because God said, hey, I'm going to send Pastor Lawson to Houston, Texas. And again, you know, he could have been like, yeah, I'm about to move to Atlanta. But he lived his life for the Lord. It wasn't even about him. Also, he was like, when other pastors
I read that.
didn't even want Dr. King to come, he like, come on.
Here for sure.
When other pastors didn't want to ordain women in ministry, Pastor Lawson was like, come on. And it's like, you know, the fact that people say, oh, he was simple and yet profound, and he can take a bag of chips and make a sermon. It's like, man, you know, you don't have to be deep to be profound. I think that's the biggest thing. We had an event yesterday, and it was long. but it could have been longer because you can't just, it's hard to talk about Pastor Lawson 2-3 minutes. Right? And of course, you know, you got to go home, you got to come back the next day, so you have to shorten it. But when a man like that, you know, and we're able to be in his presence.
Right, that's amazing.
Yeah, you can go on and on like about him. So for the short time I did get a chance to, you know Pastor Lawson, it's like when you get in his presence, you feel like, oh, that's my granddad. You know, I've been knowing him for a long time, and that's just the type of guy he was. And I think we can be great too if we like look at his example, and of course in our own way. And again, just like serve people. I think that's what it's all about. That's what Jesus did, and he was a follower of Christ.